So are you, or maybe someone you know, part of a blended family, right? That's a situation where there was an original marriage and maybe there was kids and then there was a divorce and then there was a remarriage and, well, you still got the kids from the prior marriage. So how does all of that play? I think there's been some made-for-TV movies, or at least for Netflix, that describe the horrors of what can happen. And I'm sure you've probably heard of those stories. Folks getting cut out of wills, folks getting kicked out of houses, all of those kinds of things. So on the program this week, we're going to talk about that and some of the specific things you can do if you find yourself in that situation. And then on the program, where I'm joined by one of my fellow certified financial fiduciaries at Nelson Financial Planning, Rob Field. Welcome once again to the program.
Morning, Joel. Good to be back. Always enjoy joining you on the show. We always have some really fun topics.
You've seen those Netflix movies, right? The blended family that goes awry when somebody passes away. I mean, it is a real issue, and we see that play out perhaps all too frequently.
Right. It's very dramatic. Sometimes it's humorous. There's even a commercial where they're reading the will and the cat gets everything. I mean, that's one type of estate planning.
Correct. And where it gets very interesting is in that blended family situation. So we're going to talk a lot about that on this week's program. And then, Rob, we're also going to talk, and this was a subject that you brought up, part of our kind of ongoing process that we do around the office with everybody on the team is we always look for interesting topics, interesting stories, interesting articles. And you brought this one to our attention, and that is perception versus reality in terms of where we are economically, as we're not quite to the halfway point for 2024, but my goodness, we're getting pretty close to that halfway point. So we got some interesting stuff on that too.
Right. We're going to talk about a survey we saw where they asked 2,000 people their thoughts on the markets, the economy, what did they think was going on? And then we're going to also then explain what really is going on and the difference. And we were surprised at how off people are and what they think is going on and what maybe is affecting. We're going to kind of get a little esoterical and talk psychology-wise. What is it that sometimes influences people's decisions and where are they getting their information?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting topic and a nice continuation of the topic that I covered about 3 weeks ago on the program about the question that I think we hear a lot about, the U.S. is in demise, the dollar's going to get replaced. All of that sort of goes hand in hand with this perception versus reality. So welcome on in to this week's edition of Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. One of Central Florida's longest running radio programs, also coming to you on a host of podcast platforms along with our YouTube channel. My name, of course, is Joel Garris, certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning, where we got a team of great folks who also happen to be certified financial fiduciaries, like Rob Field, who's joining us this week on the program. Rob's also a specialty is also Social Security as a National Social Security advisor. So the purpose of the program and the purpose of what we do during the week at the office is to help you improve your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. So one of the things that we had an opportunity to do this past week, speaking of the office, is we had an opportunity to participate in a really neat event that was put on by Orange County Public Schools and a Gift for Teaching, the Great Big Backpack Build. So that was pretty neat. Rob, I know last year you went. I guess you got the short straw this year. You were one of the folks that manned the office while we were away.
Well, we had so much fun last year. That was the first year we did it. Jamie, who kind of helps with our social media side, and also was a past teacher, had a big interest in this and shared it with us. And we said, great. And so obviously we can't gut the office, so we sent half the office last year. I got to go. That was the first time. And it's really fantastic. It's a lot of people coming together and sort of making a little machine of building backpacks. And at the end, they're building 10,000 or more backpacks, and really with the backpack itself, the pencils and pens and the items that go in it, they stack them all up. And then they're trying to get these backpacks to students who might not be in a financial position to just get any kind of backpack they want. So they go to school, they got a backpack, it's got some great stuff in it. It was a lot of fun. I mean, you can tell a little bit about which position you did, but my job last year was to take these backpacks and stack them up. We just put them on a huge pallet, and then they shipped these out and made sure they got to the appropriate students.
Yeah, I was talking to Jamie there, and last year I was not. I think I might have been out of town. I did not go last year. This year was my first year to go, and they really do it very efficiently. And they've been doing it for a number of years. This was our second year of participating, but it's down at the Orange County Convention Center, which I hadn't been there in a while. You forget how fortunate we are here in Central Florida, where we have these phenomenal facilities, phenomenal convention center. That's just, you walk into it, it's just massive. And so the folks at Gift for Teaching did a great job of putting this together in such a way to your point, it really worked very efficiently, where you literally grab a backpack, you walk down the line, you grab one of each item. So it's a notebook, it's markers, it's pencils, it's a pencil sharpener. Really, there was 7 or 8 items, and it really did, to your point, Rob, it would provide needy students with pretty much all that they would need to really kind of get started and get the year off well. Hard to believe that, school year's probably coming up. Seems like school vacation just started, but here, of course, in Florida, school starts pretty early, so the kids will be back in, mid-August, which is right around the corner. So, and the numbers of participation were much greater than last year. So they actually did over 21,000 backpacks.
Wow. That's almost double.
Yeah.
That's great.
So really great, and such a worthy cause. So a neat little difference in terms of kind of what the past week held. But certainly we want to shift gears and sort of tackle our topics that we've teed up here at the beginning of the program. And one is really sort of what's going on economically, this whole conversation about reality versus perception, particularly regarding the current state of the economy. And this is some interesting stats that came from that Harris poll that you mentioned earlier that really helps to address that perception of where we are economically, and for that matter, where we aren't.
It's a good point. It was an interesting survey. We're going to share some numbers with you. The main theme there was, recession. Are we in one or are we not in one? Or did we have one already, or is there one coming? And everybody had a different opinion. And you often wonder where they were getting their information from, other than, we know you can tap into all kinds of sources. Some are more accurate than others. But, we know overall that the information we do receive, it can be accurate, or sometimes it can be misleading. And then depending on what source you use for getting your news and information, you might find that what you think is actually different from what's really going on in the world. Give you an idea of what we're referring to. We're going to share these results. This consumer survey, they targeted 2,000 people and just asked them to describe their feelings about the markets and about the economies. And then the survey gives us a great way to compare the perception of what they thought was going on versus what the statistics, the facts and the figures really show. And I think it's going to be surprising the difference between what they really honestly believe. These are people who this is what they think is going on. And we'll kind of look at their answers and how it stacks up to reality.
Right. The truth, if you will.
Right, the truth.
The actual economic data.
Right,
yeah.
The things that you can show, if you do enough research, you can actually show these numbers are true. We're going to talk a little bit about the economy and what they viewed. We're going to talk a little bit about inflation. We're going to talk about unemployment. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how the markets look.
Yeah, so it should be pretty interesting, this big gap between perception versus reality. So we're going to take a break. When we return from the break, we're going to dig straight into that topic and give you the results of this most recent Harris poll and what actually is happening and what you can do to really not find yourself in the kind of trap that you could easily find yourself based on the information that you are receiving. With that, we'll take a break here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris and Rob Field of Nelson Financial Planning. Perception versus reality. Boy, that gap can be quite big, particularly when we start to think about your finances. So, in this segment of the program here on Dollars and Cents, we're going to talk about some of the results from the latest Harris Survey poll and then give you the truth in terms of the actual economic data that exists that really undermines this notion that people have a tendency to sort of gravitate to the negative. The reality is that a lot of the information that we get is intended to be slanted to the fear side because fear is a much greater emotion, and consequently when you're in marketing and when you're advertising, it's all about getting more eyes because that then helps to increase your advertising revenue. That's just the way the world works. So thanks for joining on in to this week's episode of Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. My name is Joel Garris. With me this week is Rob Field. Both of us are certified financial fiduciaries with Nelson Financial Planning. So what's the first stat? We got 4 different stats, Rob, that we're going to share with the listening audience. What's the first one that came out as a result of this survey?
Yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to give, there were a bunch of answers. I'm going to take some of the ones that I think are the most interesting and that our listeners would enjoy. I'm going to tell you what the participants said. And then, if you don't mind, why don't you share what the actual numbers look
number?
like?
Okay,
yeah,
I like that.
I think it's going to be the different. There's going to be a difference. I mean, people are going to be like, "Well, how can that be?"
So you got perception, and I got reality.
Right.
Okay.
So I'm sharing
I can deal
what's
with that.
going on.
I'll be the dose of reality. I love it.
There you go. I'm going to start off on the economy. So in the survey, 56% of those that were surveyed think the U.S. is currently experiencing a recession. And another 55% believe the economy is actually shrinking.
So that is over half of the American population believes that we are currently, right now, in a recession. And the reality is nothing could be further from the truth. If you're in a recession, that means the economy is shrinking. That means it's growing at a negative number, i.e. shrinking. What's the actual data? Well, for the first quarter of the year 2024, the economy actually grew by 1.3%, and for the year 2024 overall, it's expected to grow by about 2.4%, double what they expect for the Eurozone and Japan. So just to kind of put that in relative terms. So again, reality, very different from perception. What's the next one, Rob?
Let's take a look at inflation. So in this survey, 72% of the 2,000 people that they surveyed, the participants, they believe that inflation is going up.
Well, this could be just the cumulative effect, and we've talked about this on the program before. The reality is that we still do have some level of inflation, but it is back in line with what you would typically expect to see, somewhere around that 3% margin. So inflation is just a normal part of how we live over the course of time, but there was a period where there wasn't really much inflation, and I think that lulled people into thinking that inflation did not exist. The flip side is when you look at this survey data, it's this perception that it is still increasing at the rate that it was increasing. Let's face it, 3% current inflation is not the 9% that we saw a couple of years ago. But at the same point in time, I think the real issue, which underscores a lot of the negativity, is that the cumulative impact, right? I mean, the cumulative impact of 9% inflation, followed by 6% inflation, followed by, think of the COLA adjustments for Social Security, all of that cumulatively over the past 3 years, been about 20%. So, the data, the poll data, I think represents what has been happening cumulatively, but certainly inflation has certainly gotten much more in check than what it is, which has led the Federal Reserve to not have to mess with rates either.
Right.
They've been able to kind of keep rates where they are at. So that's an interesting one on inflation. What's the next one you got?
Let's take a look at unemployment. So in the survey, 49% of the people think that the current unemployment rate is at a 50-year high. They think it's at a 50-year high for employment.
Yeah, that one couldn't be further from the truth. Matter of fact, just this past Friday, the latest jobs data came out. And I don't know if you saw that or not, Rob, but it was 272,000 jobs that were created for the month of May. That was an increase over April, and a much higher job creation just in the most recent month than what was originally predicted. Unemployment rate at 4%, which basically puts it almost near a 50-year low rather than a 50-year high. So clearly this one, very different reality than the perception that exists. What's number 4 on the list? We said we were going to share 4 different things here.
I was going to, in the survey, they were asking people's opinion on the stock market. How do they think it was performing? And this hits close to home to us because we get these calls where the same responses we saw in the survey, our clients are telling us, oh, well, this is what's going on. They're telling me what the market's doing, and it's not always accurate. So an example, in this survey, 49% believe that the S&P 500 is on a decline and that it is down this year.
Yeah, that's an amazing one because that means 50% think the markets are down. The reality is the S&P 500 up about 8-9% since the beginning of the year. If you look over the past 12 months, it's actually had a pretty good run, up nearly 20% over that past 12-month period of time. So very different reality versus perception, and I think that's really important for people to kind of recognize and understand the difference, because at some point this can start to influence the investment, the retirement, and the financial decisions that ultimately you make.
Right, and that's important because the decisions you're making today have a long-term effect over many years to come. And if you continuously listen to the negativity and assume that that is accurate and thus make decisions to avoid the market because it's having all these issues, which it's not, you're going to get left on the sidelines somewhere down the road with your overall performance.
You know, it gets you into the mindset of, I'm going to wait and see. I'm going to wait and see. And one of the things we know about investing is that if you're constantly waiting to see what's going to happen, you're losing time. And at the end of the day, time is your most valuable asset when it comes to your investments, because it's over time that your investments are going to grow. It's not what's going to happen next month or next quarter or in the election this fall. It's how are my investments going to perform over the course of the rest of my life, which, you know, in today's world, everybody's living longer. So if you're 60, you probably got still got a 30-year time horizon.
Right. And you've said this often. It's not about timing the market. It's about time in the market, meaning that it's not, your success doesn't come from picking when to be in the market and when not to be in the market. Your success comes from being in the market with the right mix, sticking with it, having a portfolio that you like to call the all-weather portfolio, and letting it do its job.
Yeah, it's certainly, you know, what's sad is how much the media in and of itself really does focus on this negativity, and ultimately that really drives it. I remember a story, this was probably 15 years ago now, involving our good friend who's enjoying his retirement, Bud Hedinger. And so it was one of those times where Bud had me on his morning radio show because the market had gone down. And I said to him, well, you know, Bud, how come I only hear from you and get this invitation to come on your radio program on Good Morning Orlando? How come I only get that invitation when the market's down? You never reach out to me when the market's going up to talk about that. And he laughed because, you know, Bud's, you know, a humorous guy, and said, well, you know, Joel, okay, bad news always sells better than good news. So keep that in mind as you're kind of getting some of that information, some of that perception, you know, that is out there, because it is reality can also often be very different than perception. That's for sure.
Right. The reality is, even though overall inflation is easing and the cost of groceries are going up, bottom line, these cost increases are really not carried across the board. The economy is getting strong and is continuing to prosper.
Well, and I think those are the important things to kind of remember. And unfortunately, far too often, it impacts the decisions that you make as an investor. And that's the importance of really understanding this distinction between reality versus perception. With that, we're going to take a break and return after these messages here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris and Rob Field of Nelson Financial Planning. So are you, or maybe you know someone who is part of a blended family, kids from different relationships, different marriages, whatever the case may be? There's a lot of pitfalls that can land at your doorstep if you have not figured out your estate planning properly. And let me tell you, estate planning in a blended family does get very complicated, and that would be Rob's laughing next to me. That would be an understatement, right?
True.
Estate planning in a blended family is complicated.
I mean, we laugh about what you see on Netflix and the commercial with the cat, but those things really do occur. People really get adventurous when they're trying to decide where money's going to flow to, but more importantly, they don't realize that the way they may have it structured is not going to have the money flow the way that they think or had wanted.
A lot can happen on the way to the grave, if you will. So that's our topic coming up here on Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. We're one of Central Florida's longest running radio programs, coming to you on a host of radio stations throughout the Central Florida region. Also a top 25 financial planning podcast on the big wide world web. Once you find us on your particular podcast channel, make sure you subscribe to us, and then that way you'll get notified when we have new content. Any trouble finding our channel on your favorite platform, go to our website, nelsonfinancialplanning.com, and you'll see the icons. Click on them, and it'll get you immediately connected on over. My name, of course, is Joel Garris, certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary. Joining me on the program this week, Rob Field, also a certified financial fiduciary and a National Social Security advisor. Welcome again to the program, Rob. We got lots to talk about in this segment, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Many families still kind of have this traditional mindset, and not to say that the traditional family is gone. There's certainly plenty of traditional families out there, but if we think of that traditional family, husband, wife, and they have kids. Husband dies, because more often than not, let's face it, it's the guy that goes first, okay? Wife gets the money, and ultimately, then wife dies, and it just goes directly to the kids. Easy peasy, could not be simpler. But along the way, there is a lot of different things that can happen beyond that traditional estate plan.
Right. I mean, the traditional, as you mentioned, is husband, wife, they've got kids. Husband or the wife passes, they leave it to the spouse. Spouse runs along, she wants to leave it to the kids. But then if for some reason or another you interject another party, there's a divorce or there's a death, everything changes. The exact structure that you have in place is not necessarily going to flow.
Well, and that's where the wrinkles start to come into play, right? So let's say husband passes away, wife decides to get remarried, any of those kinds of things, anything that involves a subsequent marriage is really going to change things dramatically. And I'll tell you, we see this all the time. I mean, if there's a divorce or a death, we have seen many instances where within a year or so, someone's getting remarried. Particularly, we see it with passings, with deaths. And I mean, what's also kind of strange about it is it's usually like reverts back to like the high school girlfriend or something like that. And I mean, it's always fascinating. I guess we all wish we were back in high school. I don't necessarily wish I was back in high school. Wasn't very good, playing on the chess team for popularity purposes. But there does seem to be that trend, and that's where things can get convoluted very, very quickly.
That's funny. I mean, I enjoyed high school. I thought I was on the tennis team, which wasn't as cool as the football team. But,
Not as cool as the chess team.
but I also was in the band for a while. So
okay,
I had my moments of but it's all a learning experience, and I had a good time. And there, I can think back. Often I'm now divorced, so sometimes you're like, okay, what's my next step going to be? Oh, I remember, Carolyn or Kathy from high school. She sure was cute. In my mind, I'm thinking if she still looked like that, then maybe I should look her up. So I think high school sweethearts really do have a place in our hearts for many years.
That's funny. But what are the stats? I mean, what are we talking about in terms of families? There's a lot of different families that confront this issue.
Right. Well, I mean, we've seen from our studies that really over 20% of married couples that have a partner currently may have had a previous partner before divorce or something like that, and then that previous partner, and then now your current partner. It might be two sets of kids. So now you've got new kids coming in, old kids on the block that have been around for a while. And then this is where we start to talk about what this topic is about, which is the estate planning issues you run into when you're now blending first family and second family.
Well, and we've all heard this horror stories. We were joking earlier about the Netflix and then that commercial about leaving, where the cat gets all of it. They're just, we've seen all manner of those horror stories where the biological kids, right, get cut out. And the stepkids wind up getting the money, right? The beneficiaries get changed. We've seen where trusts get changed to start to include stepchildren, start to include other individuals as well, or even where the remaining surviving spouse gets forced out of the house that they were living in. I mean, these are some of the things that can happen a tremendous amount. That is for sure.
Right. I mean, you go into a marriage, and obviously unfortunately, the last thing on your mind is the finances and the estate planning. You're madly in love, and so everything looks good. You're talking back and forth, just kind of sort of at a 20,000-foot level, and we'll do it that way. That'll be great, but if it's not spelled out, or if things start to go amiss, or if the second marriage is suddenly not really built on the love, but it was somebody who kind of found a way. I don't want to go into great detail, but in our family we experienced that where had a
This is a personal story. The whole for lack of a better description, it's the old gold digger story, if you will.
Right. I mean, it's one of those things that everybody is going to experience. Everybody's got moms and grandparents, and I had a grandfather who was truly a ladies' man, was just wonderful with the women, and his wife passed and he wanted to get remarried, and he was courted by a woman that was a little bit younger than him, and she doted on him, and he just thought that was great. And then immediately he was forced to sell the house that he was currently in, which would have gone half to my mom and half to my uncle, and then got into a new house that's solely in her name, and then assets that were distributed, going to go down to a certain side, were suddenly re-registered, and then there were some younger kids that came in with the new blended family, and it spun out of control terribly. And once it's at a point, and then my grandfather passed, there was nothing we could do about it.
Yeah, and that's the point what we've talked about previously on the show is once you change the beneficiary, once you change the registration, that's gonna go to whoever you've named subsequently. It doesn't matter whether you've got a will or even a trust that says something totally different. If you change the beneficiaries or you change the registrations, I mean that can really undermine things very quickly. So what are the three primary tools in the tool shed, if you will, for folks that find themselves in this blended family situation, and we're going to break down each one of them. So what are the primary tools?
Just the basic three that you're going to want to consider and kind of keep as an option somewhere down the road would be, first of all, a trust. You got specified instructions of how you would want money to flow. The other one that we do a lot here would be leaving a specific amount to a specific person. So now you're saying in writing, this is what I want to happen. It's listed on the investment. There's no argument, would bypass probate. And then it's very important to think in terms of, do you need a prenuptial agreement Might you need a postnuptial agreement? Those are the three things that certainly should be addressed.
Well, that's a lot to break down. I mean, when we think about a trust is basically a contract. It spells out specific terms. So in the event of a blended family, each spouse having their own trust and having that trust relate to their own assets then helps to kind of divide things up. But there's a real crucial element when you're working with a trust that you must do, and we'll tell you what that is after these words. So return back here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris and Rob Field of Nelson Financial Planning to find out what that is that you must do with a trust in order to make it effective. Coming up next after these messages. So blended families, maybe you're part of one, maybe you have a friend who's part of one. Real pitfalls here that you need to be aware of. There's three primary tools that we talked about before the break. The trust, using a trust designated a specific amount of money to specific people. And then lastly, talking about a prenup or maybe even a postnup type of agreement. And so we're just beginning to kind of tear into the trust part and using the trust whereby each spouse has their own trust. And so the assets that they had when they came into the marriage, those assets are titled in that trust because that trust, after all, is a contract that specifies out the specific terms and what's going to happen when someone passes. Now, before the break, Rob, I was teasing the audience a little bit, saying there's one important thing that you have to remember when you're using a trust, and that is that you must actually fund that trust. Fund, F-U-N-D, that trust, because if you don't, then it's just words on paper. When we talk about funding a trust, it means that you re-register over an investment account. You re-register over a bank account. You re-register over a piece of real estate into that trust in order for that trust to actually function the way that you want. If you don't do that, then you are out of luck. So that's the important piece when it relates to trust and understanding that you've got to not just create the guideline, the contract, if you will, but you've got to get stuff registered over into that name of that trust. So that's number one. Number two is what's next on the list?
Well, number two is leaving the specific amount to a specific person. So, when you pass, you want your kids addressed. And if you want to be specific with a certain investment, then we look at something like a transfer on death. We call it the TOD. Or it could be a POD on your bank. And basically that specific investment, you have allocated who's going to be the beneficiary and what percent of that they're going to get. It also bypasses probate. And the will is not going to be able to change what you have put in place with the transfer on death agreements.
So intentionally designed where if I die, these assets are going to go to my kids. They're not going to go to my current spouse. And so I've done that courtesy of naming specific beneficiaries. And then there's, so that's the second option. The third option is one that I think always has a little bit of an emotional perception to it. And that's the conversation about having a prenuptial agreement, whereby you basically come to a written contract and an agreement prior to getting married as to what exactly is going to happen. And if you're listening to the program and you find yourself in this situation, you're like, wait a minute, it makes a little sense what these guys are saying, and maybe I need to do something about it. Well, then that would be the post-nuptial agreement, which might be an even harder conversation, but depending upon what you want to make sure happens, then it is a valuable conversation to have. Prenuptial agreement obviously happens before you get married, post-nuptial after. The reality is that both of those are legal documents. The standard legal advice that I have heard our attorneys give is that if you're doing a pre or a post-nuptial agreement, both of you need to be represented by different legal counsel. So it does get a little complicated, but certainly an important consideration when we think about blended families and how all of that works. Now, so those are the three tools in the toolbox, if you will: using trust, naming specific percentages to specific individuals, use of a prenup or a postnup agreement. The three tools in the toolbox, if you will, to address the blended family situation. But Rob, there's a couple of other considerations that we wanted to share on the program as well.
Well, sure. So if you've got your trust in place and it has instructions, somebody's got to follow those instructions and make sure that they're actually put in place that you want. So it's when you're choosing that, you got to come up with a trustee. That's a person who, when you're passed, they are going to make sure that the trust does what it's supposed to do. So you got to have the right trustee, or if you use an executor, the right executor. And they must be knowledgeable in what you're trying to do. They must understand how the trust works. They must understand what your intentions were and make sure the trust is in fact following those rules. And then they've got to have the right temperament. They've got to be, unbiased and be able to make decisions and to follow the trust. So you probably don't want to pick one kid out of your family to be the trustee, because now he's got the reins to something he shouldn't have. And then it creates friction with the other kids or other family members. So you got to really think through who is going to be in charge.
Pretty important consideration for people to remember. If you're using a trust, there's got to be somebody then that is administering that trust after you're gone. And can be quite tricky territory, particularly in the situation of a blended family and kind of how all of those dynamics work. The other consideration, and this one actually came up in the office just this past week, which kind of led us to want to talk about this on the program this week, is there is something that's called a statutory share. And I think this one gets missed a lot. And in fact, as I said, it just came up this past week at the office. It had been a second marriage, and this is a second marriage that's 20 years old. It's not it's not a new second marriage, and there was obviously adult kids from the first, no kids from the second marriage, and so the individual was under the impression that as long as they didn't put their new spouse's name on things, as long as they kept the beneficiaries to go directly to their kids, then that's how everything would pass. But that's not the case in any way, shape, or form, because there's something called a statutory or elective share, where in most states, the surviving spouse, so it doesn't matter whether you've been married a week or 20 years, the surviving spouse has the opportunity to claim as their own, typically a third or a half of the estate, regardless of beneficiary designations, regardless of anything that you might have thought was going to happen. So the marriage is a legal institution that does give certain rights to the surviving spouse, certain legal protections, that surviving spouses are not just simply sent out on the streets. That elective share is a pretty important concept that people also need to be aware of, because if you're in a blended family and you think, oh, well, we've got it all taken care of because I didn't add their name, or I don't have them on as beneficiaries, the reality is that they still legally, and in Florida, that statutory share amount is 30% that they could get regardless of what the overall beneficiary designation is. So a pretty important consideration, pretty important concept. This is a very complicated and layered issue that at the end of the day, we would urge our listeners to get good legal counsel on making sure that the estate planning part of the blended family is properly addressed.
Sure. And I always tell them, you get your estate planning attorney and keep up with it, because sometimes you need to alter the document, or there's been a change, or grandkids come in. So it's a work in motion. And the number of people that walk in and say, well, gosh, I put this in place 10 years ago. I haven't talked to my lawyer since. Just really shouldn't. That's just not the way to keep up with it.
Yeah, it really does need to be revised and reviewed every several years. Certainly important to keep on track of it. The reality is that we all remember the Brady Bunch. Everything was happy in the Brady Bunch, but we don't really know what happened after the parents passed. Did the kids start infighting? Did they kick poor Florence Henderson out of the house? I mean, how did that really play out? And the reality is that in today's world, unfortunately, we see it play out pretty negatively. And so you've got to use these tools, and you got to be aware of these important considerations, particularly when it comes to blended family. I guess that ties well into the other thing we talked about on the program, Rob, which is this perception versus reality, right? Perception versus reality. You can perceive something in a blended family situation, but the reality is it might turn into something totally different.
Right. We know that 20% of all the families are going to have some kind of a horror story. 1 out of 5 families thought everything was going to be great. It didn't work out that well. The reality is, there's going to be divorces. There's going to be second marriages. There's going to be kids to contend with. There's going to be kids that become adults, and there's going to be some emotional and financial issues. Addressing it now before you get in the middle of it is going to be a lot more efficient.
Or before it's too late. I mean, that's the reality. Very different than the perception, as it was, as we talked about early in the program, that data that showed what people were thinking in terms of what was going on in the economy and what actually was happening. With that, we're going to wrap it on up and get on out of here. Thank you for listening to this week's program of Dollars and Cents. If you like what you heard or want to learn more about what we do Monday through Friday, go to our website, nelsonfinancialplanning.com. Have a great rest of your day.